Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. To the Kiowa Nation, the cluster of 7 stars visible this time of year represents 7 sisters who were lifted into the sky to escape a bear. It's one of many important tribal stories associated with the constellation Western astronomy calls the Pleiades. And like other stories, they carry lessons and cultural teachings while also marking important times of the year. We'll hear about the Pleiades and what they mean to different tribes coming up next.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. Ahead of the next legislative session this month, Arizona Democratic state lawmakers held a town hall at the end of December on MMIP, or Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrorazio has details.
Indigenous Peoples Caucus Chair Senator Sally Ann Gonzalez, who is Pascua Yaqui, made no promises.
We will not have solutions for you today.
But she and others spent 3 hours listening.
Listening without action has become a pattern.
Reva Stewart, who is Diné, believes families relive their trauma by testifying with no results.
Legislation without enforcement is not protection. Task force without authority or accountability are not solutions. Meetings without funding are not justice.
Roxanne Barley, who is Kokaput, complained that criteria changed for the state's turquoise alert, originally designed to notify the public of indigenous disappearances. Of the 5 alerts, only 1 has been for a Native American, a teen in Yuma.
That was the lie that we were promised. That was the hoax that we were told.
But Senator Teresa Hatachli, who is Diné, explained how lawmakers compromised.
And that is the ugly truth of politics.
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
Alaska state health officials continue to recommend the hepatitis B vaccine for all newborns, despite a recent controversial change in federal guidance. The virus has historically seriously impacted Alaska Native communities, as Alaska Public Media's Rachel Cassandra reports.
Hepatitis B is a virus spread through bodily fluids and from mother to baby during childbirth. Historically, Alaska has had high rates of hepatitis B, especially among Alaska Native people. In the 1970s, widespread infection led to high rates of liver cancer in Alaska Native children. State Epidemiology Chief Dr. Joe McLaughlin says screening and vaccinations have helped reduce rates of hepatitis B in the state. And McLaughlin says the vaccine is still important in Alaska, which has struggled with high rates of chronic hepatitis B.
This universal birth dosing helps to ensure every baby receives protection, regardless of their location, their access to care, or any follow-up challenges that they might have. This approach has definitely helped reduce disparities in hepatitis B outcomes across Alaska for decades.
Public health experts credit the vaccine with dramatically lowering the risk of developing chronic hepatitis B, serious liver diseases, and liver cancer. For over 3 decades, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommended that all babies across the country get the vaccine at birth. Then last month, the CDC narrowed its guidance, recommending the vaccine only for infants born to women who test positive for the virus or whose status is unknown. The guidance says women who test negative should consult a healthcare provider before vaccinating their newborn. But McLaughlin emphasizes that the CDC also acknowledged that each state has to consider its own hepatitis B rates and risk factors.
Alaska, where the rates are nearly 3 times the national average, clearly falls into a higher risk category as a state in general. And our data support continuing universal birth dose vaccination to protect infants in Alaska.
Health insurers have said they will continue to cover the hepatitis B vaccine. In Anchorage, I'm Rachel Cassandra.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com. Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. A cluster of 7 or so visible stars in the winter sky is commonly called the Pleiades on Western star maps. The Greek word refers to the daughter of the Greek god Atlas. Indigenous people see these stars as a winter timekeeper and as illustrations of important cultural stories, even a place of origin. The Anishinaabe call the cluster the hole in the sky. Navajos say it represents the black god and other deities. And the Senecas say it's a group of men who dance so hard they rose up into the sky. In this hour, we'll hear stories and teachings connected to the Pleiades. You, too, can join with your own story about the constellation as well. Give us a call. The number's 1-800-996-2848. That is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now on Zoom from Washburn, Wisconsin, is Michael Wasegijig Price. He is an Anishinaabe culture and language keeper, and he is from the Wikwemikong First Nation. Michael, hello, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Bonjour, honey. Thank you.
Bonjour. Joining us from Tonawanda, Seneca Territory in New York is Jamie Jacobs. He is the managing curator of the Rock Foundation Collection at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. He is Tonawanda Seneca Turtle Clan. Jamie, you've been on the show also. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Good to be back.
And joining us from Salt Lake City, Utah is Cal Nez. He is a Navajo spiritualist, a fine arts artist, and graphic designer. He is, of course, Navajo. Cal, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be on.
It's great to have all of you on the show today. And Michael, I want to begin with you because for listeners who might not be familiar with the Pleiades, where can we find them in the night sky and when are they most noticeable?
Yes, the Pleiades is actually not a constellation. It is actually a cluster of stars. And in our latitude here in the Great Lakes region, if you look around November 1st, around that area, you'll start to see the star cluster rise on the eastern horizon. And each night, that constellation makes its way farther and farther up into the night sky. Until about this time of year, about early January, we should be able to see the Pleiades directly overhead when we go out in the early evening, say around 8 p.m., 9 p.m.
That's interesting. Okay, so November 1st is around the time people can first notice them in the sky. And at what point do they kind of fade out and it's harder to see them for the rest of the year?
Yeah, it's usually around mid-April to late April that you'll see the Pleiades eventually sink below the western horizon. And I know that a lot of other indigenous communities that they use the movement of that star cluster as like a calendar per se, a way to start ceremonies and to end ceremonies. And our teachings are a little bit different, which we'll talk about.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, you mentioned it is not technically a constellation, it is a cluster. What's the difference?
Well, I think a cluster is stars that are aligned in a certain pattern, and people over the centuries, over the eons, have recognized those patterns. A cluster of stars, if you look at the Pleiades on just a regular clear night, you'll see 7 prominent, bright stars. But on a very clear night, you could probably see hundreds. And if you have a telescope, you can actually see, possibly over 1,000 stars in that cluster. So dependent upon the atmosphere, dependent upon, if it's hazy or if it's clear, sometimes you can see different number of stars in that one little, that's what we call it, a star cluster.
Okay. Now, researching for this show, I learned that the Pleiades are approximately 440 light years away. And help us out with some context and perspective in terms of other stars, other clusters. Is that close? Is it far away? Is it kind of in the middle?
Well, each star has their own distance. So you're not going to see a bundle of stars in a three-dimensional, image. If they're in very different, distances away. And just to give you an idea, a light year is 186,000 miles. Let's see, 186,000 miles per second. That is the speed of light. So if a star's 400 million miles away, then you'd multiply 186,000 miles per second, according to that number, 400 million. So we're talking about a very long distance.
Yeah. Fascinating. Michael, at the beginning of the show, we mentioned to the Anishinaabe, they consider the cluster a hole in the sky. Talk more about what that means.
So in our Anishinaabe teachings, I approached one of my elders and he gave me an explanation of the meaning behind this constellation. That teacher, his name was Topasanequat Kenyu. Topasanequat Kenyu Ibun. Ibun means he's passed on now. And he told me, I asked him about the meaning of that constellation. And he said, well, Michael, it goes back to an old creation story that we don't tell anymore. And it talked about how our ancient ancestors came down from the star world. And as they approached the earth, Aki, they came through this opening in the sky called a Bogone Gijik, a hole in the sky. And then they climbed down this gigantic cedar tree from that hole in the sky down to the earth. Okay, so this hole in the sky represents where our ancestors came from. And Gijik, this is a very interesting word. Gijik means sky, and it also means cedar tree. So that celestial cedar tree that our ancient ancestors climbed down was that which connects the earth to the star world. And that's why today Gijik, or cedar trees, are very sacred and very important to our culture as Anishinaabe people. We make medicines from the boughs. We use the wood to make our frames for our canoes and a lot of our cultural equipment that we have. We use the bark in weaving. So every part of that tree is meaningful to us, and that tree itself is sacred to us. It's medicine tree to us. And so Gijik, again, is that which connects the star world to the earth. And that's why Gijik means both sky and cedar tree.
Mm. Michael, I think so often when we talk about the stars, when we talk about astronomy, there's so much emphasis on the ancient Greeks and European perspectives and European astronomers, but people all across the world have been looking at stars since time immemorial, indigenous people, of course, as well. What are some other important lessons from a native perspective or from an Anishinaabe perspective do stars like this hold?
I'm sorry, what could you repeat that question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what are some other lessons that we can learn, important lessons as Native people, from just looking at stars and clusters such as the Pleiades?
So the Pleiades also has another Anishinaabe name. Of course, back in those days, we didn't have social media. We didn't have, written texts. A lot of communities just kind of developed the stories within their communities. And as a result, sometimes there's several stories for the same, image in the sky. So in the 1850s, there was this explorer named Johann George Cole. In 1850, he wrote a book called Gichigame, Life Among the Lake Superior Ojibwe. And in that book, he's got like maybe 5 paragraphs about what he calls the Indian astronomy. And in that text, he wrote down that the Pleiades is identified as Mado de Swan. Mado de Swan. And what that means is talking about the sweat lodge or the stones used in the sweat lodge. And when you look at the Pleiades on just a regular clear night, you'll see 7 prominent stars. And that was our instructions for how many stones we use in each round of the sweat lodge ceremony. So we use 7 stones, which is in accordance with that cluster of stars. So again, these were different communities. One Anishinaabe community called it the Bugonagijic. Another Anishinaabe community called it Mado de Swan. And both of those meanings have a tremendous amount of knowledge within those names that is valuable to us as Anishinaabe people, especially after we're putting, our culture and our languages back together as a result of colonization. So this has been very, very beneficial to us.
We're talking about the Pleiades today. This is a cluster of 7 or so visible stars in the winter sky. And if you are a stargazer yourself, or maybe your people have stories about the stars, maybe specifically this cluster of 7 stars that we refer to as the Pleiades, you can join this conversation. Pick up your phone, give us a call, tell us what you know, tell us perhaps some of the significance of what this star cluster means to your people, to your culture, or perhaps other star clusters that you are familiar with as well. Phone lines are open. All you have to do is call us, 1-800-996-2848. Again, that number is 1-800-996-2848. You can also connect with us on social media. You can go to our Facebook page or Instagram. We also have Blue Sky and Threads. You can post, comment, and like on those platforms. And you can also go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and post a comment there. So again, we are talking about the Pleiades. A cluster of 7, maybe 6, depending on how visible they are. Or maybe if you have a telescope, you can see even more. You can see some of the other stars as well in this cluster that Michael just referred to. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and continue this conversation. Stay with us. And again, the phone number to join us, 1-800-99-NATIVE. We'll take time to recognize 2 important voices on the national scene who have recently walked on. Ben Nighthorse Campbell was the first Native American elected to the Senate, and Harvey Pratt was a prominent advocate for the arts. We'll remember both men on the next Native America Calling.
Repatriation is the return of ancestors and stolen culture. The Association on American Indian Affairs is hosting the 11th annual Repatriation Conference, Feeding the Fire, Advancing the Movement, in February 2026. This fully virtual conference will offer small group interactive workshops, strategies, networking, and more to advance domestic and international repatriation. More at Indian-Affairs.org. The association supports this show.
Thank you for tuning in to Native America Calling. We were talking about the Pleiades today, a cluster of stars in the winter sky, visible now. To some tribal traditions, they illustrate important stories and carry lessons and traditions. What connection does this group of stars have for your people? Please join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. We have the phone lines open and producers standing by waiting for your call. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Jamie Jacobs is the managing curator of the Rock Foundation collection at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. He joins us now from Tonawanda, Seneca Territory in New York. And Jamie, how do the Pleiades help keep track of winter activities among your people, the Seneca?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me on. Nyawe Scano. So it's very similar to what was just said by the previous guest here. my ancestors also tracked the Pleiades around the same time, around the beginning of November. And what it does is it rises, and then just as you said, it settles directly over the Great Lakes area. So our ancestors, they have a story that they had kind of put together. And the story is that, just a quick one, is that there were 7 dancers or 7 boys, and there was one who was leading them. And the one leading them said he wanted to go on a journey to go and look for his father. So he asked his mother to prepare a meal for the day that they were leaving. And what happened was the day came, and he started singing for the 7 boys. And his mother heard the song, and the song that she recognized wasn't supposed to be sung just any time of the year. So she ran outside, but when she ran outside, the boys, including the head boy, were starting to rise in the sky. So he kept telling him not to look down, and he kept singing, and they just kept dancing, and they rose higher and higher. And at one point, he couldn't hear his mother's voice anymore because she was pleading with him to stop singing. But it got so high to the point where they were directly overhead, and he couldn't hear his mother pleading to them anymore. So he looked down. So he went against his own instructions, and when he did that, he fell back to the earth. And when he hit the earth, there was a hole there. So his mother ran to the hole, and pretty soon there was a pine tree that sprouted up from this hole. So it's kind of similar to the Ojibwe, how they have a connection with the spruce tree or the cedar tree, where to us in our territory, the white pine tree is very sacred to the Haudenosaunee. So our ancestors used this to track the hunting season. And for us, when they get directly overhead, it marks the beginning of our new ceremonial cycle, which revolves around planting, because my ancient ancestors developed agriculture south of Lake Ontario. And now it's we still track this for hunting season leading up to the midwinter season and the beginning of one of our biggest ceremonies throughout the year.
Jamie, this is all really intriguing how some of these stories, some of these legends parallel within other tribes. And as I understand it, the winter season is very significant among your people. And it sounds like the Pleiades are part of that as well.
Yes, of course. So in our creation story, there were creator twins. And what happens is there was a conflict between them as they were creating the earth. So in the end, what they decided was that they were going to divide the world in half. So my ancient ancestors believed that the year was a reflection of this perpetual conflict. So the creator twin, the one that created light, his time comes in spring and summer because the days get longer, everything gets warm, everything's flourishing, sustenance. And then his brother kind of takes over the other half of the year, which is the fall and the winter. So the days get short, it gets colder, the land gets covered with ice. So when the Pleiades come up, it's also connected to the morning star. So we have a story with the morning star, whereas if you track the morning star in the fall and the winter, it's the brightest star when it gets dark, thereby announcing the coming of the time of the other creator twin, the left-handed twin. And then in the spring and early summer, it's the brightest star seen in the morning, which is announcing the coming of the right-handed creator twin, the one that created the light and warmth. So we use those together to kind of track this middle of the winter season. So it's, like I said, for us, the biggest ceremony we have is the middle of winter, because we give thanks for the old year, the abundance that we saw, and then we hope and ask the creator twins to return and bring another growing season.
And as I understand it, the Pleiades are also connected to how you count new moons. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so my ancestors tracked the year with moons, so from one new moon to the next. And that's how they traveled. That's how they, measured the year. So the 13th moon is what we believe is, or what is now known as January. So at this moon, this 13th moon, is when the Pleiades also is in the very middle of the sky, and it's also the in-between between for the morning star. So the winter equinox into the spring solstice, or the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. This is really interesting. I'm just taking a lot of notes here as you talk. Now, for someone listening to the show right now who's going to be inspired, and tonight they're going to go out and they're going to look up in the sky, they want to see the Pleiades, any advice, any tips for how they can get a good view?
Well, like I said, as soon as it gets dark and you just look up, it should be, just as it was mentioned by our previous guest, it should be right above, where we're at. And you can't really miss it. It's a cluster, just like you said. And what's interesting is that with the naked eye, usually you see 6 stars, but in the past, right, of our ancient ancestors, we know from records, and then from other ancient civilizations, you could see 7 stars with the naked eye at that time. So it's interesting that cultures that know it as the 7 dancers or the 7 sisters, that dates back to a time when 7 stars were visible with the naked eye.
I have an inexpensive telescope that I take out every now and then, not fancy at all. Would I get a better view, or do you have any tips for how to use that?
Sure.
Yeah,
definitely. You're definitely going to see a better view with a telescope. And what's interesting is that the museum that I work at, we have a shell that was made probably before the 1600s. And this shell is cut from an oceanic shell, and it comes from one of our sister nations in the Confederacy. And it actually has 7 holes drilled into this round shell. And it's really interesting to have like a tangible object from our ancient ancestors, or at least around 400 or 500 years ago, that we can still look at even today.
Jamie, what are your thoughts? I mentioned earlier how so often astronomy, the history of astronomy, the focus is on the ancient Greeks and other Europeans. What are your thoughts with regard to indigenous contributions to astronomy and just some of this history that you're sharing now, ancient devices that were used by our people to gaze into the stars?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it doesn't matter where you come from. The one common thing that we have, and the one common thing that we're going to see is the nighttime sky. And it's, just like the sun crosses during the day, the sun and the moon cross, during the night, for so many hours throughout the day. And I can only imagine that, before light pollution, before social media, before all these other things took our concentration away, storytelling and looking at the stars was definitely probably the biggest form of entertainment, for our ancient ancestors all over the world.
What cultural stories does the star cluster hold for you, the Pleiades? You can give us a call, join this conversation. The number is 1-800-996-2848. Just pick up your phone and call 1-800-996-2848. Like to hear from some listeners today. Share some history, share some culture with our listeners as well. And let's move on now to Cal Nez. He joins us from Salt Lake City, Utah. He is a Navajo spiritualist, a fine arts artist, and a graphic designer. And Cal, the Pleiades help the Navajo keep time during the winter months. How does that work?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I want to just introduce myself before we get into this thing, kind of let the listeners know who I am. My name is Cal Nez. I am Kachini, Kanisani Basishin, and also my grandfather, Nakaidine, Aro, and also Butani. Yes, I am originally from the Navajo Nation. I'm calling from Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, before I start, I think there's a lot of things that not only is the word Pleiades, or the 7 sisters, as the world knows, one of the things that I try to do in all of my teachings when I talk about the constellation from the Navajo perspective, and that is that if we can just step back a little bit and recalibrate our thinking, and that thinking is rather than calling it based on other cultures, if we can come with me to the Navajo Nation, these stories were told from the beginning of time. And it is just equivalent to any other culture's creation story. This is a story that is totally inherent in the Navajo tradition. Everything that is including the world at large, these are star clusters or these are star placements that were placed there from the beginning of time. It's here with us. It's going to be here with the world long after us. And so in my culture, if you will, they're not recognized as Pleiades or the Seven Sisters. In the Navajo way, we call them Pleiades. Pleiades is a very complicated ancient word that suggests this is the offering. And I think the offering that we're talking about here is that, again, the reminder. These are star clusters. You can't talk Pleiades alone without addressing all the other stars. And I think this ideology, this philosophy, this traditional concept could be applicable to the world, especially at this time of uncertainty. They're going to be constant no matter what's happening here on Earth. So that's kind of I'd like to preface my thought before we're talking about Pleiades. Pleiades is a cluster of stars, and I would equate that in the Navajo tradition as a gauge of time. It was the original ancient clock that dictated seasons, that dictated the time of ceremony, and the first people, the first deities that came, that created everything. The original blueprint, that's where the original blueprint of humanity, of our Earth, of our constellation, of our universe, of our galaxy. That was the blueprint. And the first God, the creator, the source, noticed, along with all of the other deities, that there was a moment and a need to gauge time.
How did it work, Cal? How were they able to use this cluster and tell time? This ancient clock, as you describe it, a gauge of time. Yeah. That is so fascinating to hear you describe it.
Yeah, and so what happened was that the Hashtek is the God, is the source. He thought, okay, let's get together today, and he put a buckskin on the ground, a pure buckskin. And so he assigned the different first people to be able to place these clusters of stars. And the first girl and the first boy, they were first asked to put a cluster of stars or put stars on this buckskins, which will be our night sky or our universe. So what they did is that the little boy and little girl, they put, rather than placing them beautifully out on the buckskin, they just kind of took their little hands and clumped it and placed it there. And then next came the first man that created the Big Dipper. And then came the first woman, and she created what we call the Cassiopeia, which is the W that we see in the sky. That is the feminine, and the Big Dipper being the male resemblance. And then in between them, they put the North Star. And then, so they created many other markers in the sky to work in concert with these stars. So everything was all beautifully laid out. But in the middle of this whole thing, of course, here comes coyote. You know what the coyote represents in most cultures.
Yeah.
They came along and says, hey, gosh, you guys are wasting so much time here. You got to change this, you know. So he says there's a lot of work to be done. So let me get this done really quickly. And he threw the buckskin up in the sky, threw the stars up everywhere. So that's why you see all the variations of patterns in the sky. But those original places of these stars stayed in position, except after he did that, one rock or one stone, one gem came back to the earth, and he picked it up and said, gosh, okay. So later in the evening, he threw it up in the sky. And so like around October or so, somewhere around that time period, you see a really bright star in the western sky, and that's Venus. So the creation of that was so, it's just amazing how it came to time clock.
Yeah. Cal, we have to take another break, but we'll come back, and I want to ask you more. And what I'm really curious to ask you is, you know, how did you learn all these cultural stories and so much of this history? But we're going to take a break first before we talk about that. And we do have the phone lines open for any listeners who would like to join this call. Now, this cluster of 7 stars, tell us the word or the words in your language. Tell us, explain. We don't necessarily have to use the word Pleiades. We can use a native term. Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Kaufman & Associates has over 35 years of experience serving Indian country, supporting growth, transformation, and sustainability of tribal programs. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
This is Native America Calling, and we are talking with Native knowledge keepers and storytellers about the significance of a cluster of stars about 448 light years away that are most prominent right now during the wintertime. What cultural stories does this star cluster hold for you? Still plenty of time. Just give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. We have Cal Nez on the line. He is a Navajo spiritualist. And Cal, wow, you just gave us some really, really good history and culture, a long description of what this cluster of stars mean to the Navajo people. How did you learn these stories?
Well, I was raised on the Navajo Nation by my grandparents, Vitani and Mary Nez. And so they have always instilled a lot of the Navajo culture, their with the ceremonies. It's all there in the ceremonies from the different seasons and different locations and different methods. Yes, that's where I learned all of that.
Fascinating. Now, to the Navajo people, there's also a reference to the Black God with regard to this cluster. Can you talk about that?
Well, you know, that in itself, there's as you all know, the Navajo Nation is really quite big. You've got Eastern Navajo, Western Navajo, Northern, Central, and so forth. And these stories that were brought down were all they were all oral history, and so the stories vary from different parts of the Navajo Nation to the other, but in general, there is Hashishina, and then there's Hashishina. Hashishina was also involved in one of that original teaching. And today in the ceremony, in the Yebiche, which is a ceremony done in October, he wears a mask. And on that mask, there is a marking that's always constant, and that's the clusters of the yeah. So it plays a really deep cultural role in the Navajo ceremonies.
Cal, do you share a lot of these stories with young people? And if so, how do they respond when they learn this culture and this history?
Well, again, that takes me back to the original thoughts, and that is that they, because the world and everybody knows pretty much a lot of the Greek mythologies and other thoughts that are out there in the world. They don't view it from what I teach, and that's why I always get into this thing where I say, you know what, let's recall this, let's get a recalibration so that we can understand that. And so this, to the Navajo people, is truth. We have our own truth, our own blueprint that we go by, and these star systems are going to be very, very as a reminder. And like I said, let me talk a little bit more about the seven. The seven, it's really, really interesting, as you notice that some of the the other speakers that are on here, one talked about the seven stones, and then there's a seven. There's seven that's constant across most tribes on the Western Hemisphere. It is my belief that seven in the stars that are even on the Yeviche mask, this is a marker that we, the people, we have to go in there and remember what has been in the past, what's current, what's in the future. These seven stars, they represent not only the seven generation, but also the seven generations from where we came from. And these markers, it was created, these represents youth of how we're supposed to live. There's teachings with every stars for the emotional teachings that we're supposed to guide. The North Star, it represents the male, and the male's teaching role, and then the feminine star cluster, they also have a role. And so when you think about it from that perspective, again, it's going to be a constant. And here's the interesting thing about this thing about the right next to it, the deities place what they call the first warrior, and that first warrior is what the world knows as Orion. And if you notice, and people know where Orion is, if you take the belt, the three stars, and if you look straight to your right, that is a marker totally directly to the seven stars. That warrior was placed there to protect the young. And so that's a lesson to all of us, that as we live here in this world, that we protect the next generation. Therefore, it protects the future of the world, especially right now. And mostly that warrior represents compassion for one another. And that applies to all humanity. It's something that we need to look at and live by today. And mostly the bottom line is that compassion and love.
Yeah. Cal, as you mentioned it, that is really timely information for our listeners. They thank you. 1-800-99-NATIVE. We still have time if someone would like to join the conversation. Listening today to our guests and just hearing some of this history and some of this culture and having it expressed so eloquently, how does that make you feel? Give us a call. I'd like to hear from someone. Just let us know. 1-800-996-2848. And I want to go back now to Michael Wasigijig Price. And Michael, today, most of our conversations here are really focused on Indigenous people in the Northern Hemisphere. But let's also talk about the Southern Hemisphere. And as I understand it, the Maori have their own views on the Pleiades. Can you enlighten us?
Yes, I am not an expert on their culture and their language. I do know that the Pleiades in their culture is called Matariki. And that, I believe, is the beginning of their calendar year. And again, they watch it by when that constellation or that star cluster rises on the eastern horizon. But unfortunately, that's the extent of my knowledge about Maori star knowledge.
Michael, what's your advice? Because I'm listening to this show. I have a daughter. I talk about her sometimes on the show. She just turned 12 years old a few days ago. And so much of this information I'm learning today is brand new. I know a little bit about some of the astronomy, like at Chaco Canyon, and some of the significance of astrological events to my own people. But how can we foster this? How can I foster a love of stargazing and astronomy from an indigenous perspective in my family, in my household, and other listeners who might be thinking the same thing on the show?
Well, a lot of people, I guess, judge indigenous knowledge or indigenous peoples by they use Western civilization or Western science as a measure. You know, is it more in depth or is it less in depth? And that really does, I think, indigenous peoples a disservice to use Western science as kind of the reference point. And for me, when I began to start learning my Anishinaabe cosmology, it took me a while to kind of detach from that Western perspective because I went through the university system, so I was a Western educated thinker. And I always tell colleagues of mine that, after I finished my master's degree at the university, I spent the rest of those years trying to deprogram from that type of thinking. And that's why I have been in pursuit of these indigenous knowledge and these traditional stories, and also learning the language too. Our language is embedded with a tremendous amount of information about our cosmology and who we are specifically as an Anishinaabe people. So when I look at the Big Dipper, I don't see a Big Dipper anymore. I don't see Ursa Major, which is, I believe that's Latin for, the big bear. What I see is Ojig Ganung. Ojig Ganung. So Ojig is one of the largest members of the weasel family that lives here in the Northwoods. It's a long, slender animal with a big, long, bushy tail. And it's one of our relatives from the Northwoods. So when you look at the Big Dipper, think of the Baal as the body of the fisher. And then look out forward to the right of that, and you'll see 3 more stars making the shoulder and the tip of the nose of the fisher. And then when you look at the bottom of the Baal, you'll be able to see the 4 legs of the fisher. And of course, the handle of the Big Dipper is the tail of Ojig, the fisher. So when I go out and see that constellation, I see Ojig. And of course, Anung means star, so Ojig Anung. That's our constellation for the fisher. And if you follow the body of that constellation of Ojig right to the tip of its nose, you'll notice that Ojig points directly at the Bogone-Gijik, or what we call in Western science the Pleiades. So when the Pleiades goes below the western horizon in late spring and is below the horizon, all summer and into early fall, we can always tell where that Bogone-Gijik is just by going out and looking at the fisher and see where its nose is pointing. And of course, we call the fisher, the Western science, the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, they are in what we call the circumpolar region of the sky, which means they never go below the horizon. So the entire constellation of Ojig is always visible. But we can always see where Ojig, his nose is pointing, and it points, directly at the Bogone-Gijik. Mm-hmm. So we can always tell where that star cluster is, Bogone-Gijik, in the summertime.
Yeah.
So to go back to your question, it makes me stronger in my culture. It makes me stronger in my identity as a Anishinaabe person. And it makes me very enthusiastic about passing this knowledge down to the next generation so that they'll have this knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Let's go to the phones. We have Cliff, who is listening on KUNM radio in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hello, Cliff. You are on the air.
Oh, wow. Thanks a lot for listening to me. I really don't have anything too deep to offer. I'm real interested in your program. Wish I had interest in what you're talking about. But anyway, to keep it short, I used to be a science teacher, and I was really into astronomy from Western culture viewpoint. I'm real interested in indigenous views. But anyhow, I was teaching kids about the Pleiades constellation. It's called Seven Sisters in some cultures, and it's called Six in others, depending on how many stars you can really see out there. The question I asked was, do you know what Subaru means in Japanese? Subaru cars have a little oval on them with 6 little stars in it.
Right.
And that's how you say the Pleiades in Japanese. It's Subaru. And kids had no trouble remembering that, but they had a hard time remembering Pleiades. Anyway, that's about all I had to offer. And thanks for your show, and thanks for having me on it for a few minutes.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you calling in, Cliff, and I hadn't even thought of that before. But yeah, you see those Subaru logos on cars on roads all across the country. Michael, had you heard that before? Subaru? Japanese word for Pleiades?
Yes, I have. Yeah. In fact, I learned that from Wilfred Buck, who was supposed to have been on the show today. He talks about Subaru, the Japanese name for the Pleiades.
Yeah, good stuff today. Jamie Jacobs, back to you in Tonawanda, Seneca territory. What are your thoughts with regard to fostering a love of stargazing and understanding astronomy, and especially among young people, young Native people?
I have to agree with my fellow guest here. Learning stories really, sparked my interest, even in my own culture. I grew up pretty much immersed in the language and the history. And when you're young, you kind of take it for granted. And then as you get older, you start paying attention to things outside your own life. And it was the language and the stories is what really caught me into it, because I had started learning a lot more language from my grandmothers. And learning the language, I learned the names for these things. And then when I learned the names, I wanted to know more about them and how they got their name. And that's when I start learning about the stories. So for myself and for others and people in my community, I know that seems to be true for, quite a few people. And it's really important because learning the language and learning the stories, you also learn the perspective of the ancestors, because that's where the stories come from.
Jamie, how often do you go outside and just look up into the sky? Do you do it every night or every week? I'm curious to know.
Anytime there's no clouds in the sky, because when there's a new moon, that's when you see more stars. And it was one of my favorite things to do when I was a late teenager, was to just go outside in the middle of a field and in my truck and just kind of look up and see what was up there. So that's what helped remind me of the stories, was by actually looking at the sky. And again, I think that's just something that, like I said, as time goes on and things get busier, we kind of take those things for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that's it. We are out of time for our conversation today, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But I do hope some of our listeners today are inspired to go outside this evening and look up into the stars and take a look for this cluster of significant 7 stars, whatever they mean to you and your people. And with that, big thanks to our guests today, Jamie Jacobs Calnez and Michael Wasigijig Price. And don't forget, join us again tomorrow when we will take time to remember 2 important national figures who recently walked on, Harvey Pratt and Ben Nighthorse Campbell. Until then, I'm your host, Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.